When I speak about death, I am not speaking about an idea or a distant possibility that we speculate about in theological circles. I am speaking about something I have tasted with every fiber of my being. There was a moment when my life on this earth came to an end. The heart stopped, the breath ceased, and the sounds of this world fell away into silence. And in that silence, a strange thing happened. I discovered that death is not an end, but a door. We imagine it as a cold finality, a cruel interruption. But when I stepped into it, I found that death is not an enemy in itself. It is an unveiling. And on the other side of that veil, I encountered Jesus Christ in a way that no sermon, no book, no argument could ever prepare me for. When I saw him, there was no debate, no question, no space for doubt. His presence was absolute. I realized that we live our earthly lives surrounded by layers of distraction, our worries, our routines, our ambitions, our theological disputes. But in the moment of death, all of that peels away. What is left is simply truth, unclothed and unfiltered. And it was there, in that state of stripped-down existence, that Jesus spoke. He did not lecture me with lofty ideas, nor did he speak with the harsh authority of command. He spoke as one who is truth itself, so that even a single word from his mouth carried the weight of eternity. This encounter shattered my assumptions. For years I had studied, preached, debated, and reasoned about spiritual matters. Like many, I had thought of speaking in tongues as one of those topics Christians love to argue over. Was it necessary? Was it emotionalism? Was it outdated? Was it even real? But when Jesus spoke to me about it in that place beyond life, I realized how small my human arguments had been. I had been like a child trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. What he revealed was not a doctrine to be defended or dismissed, but a reality to be experienced. In that moment I understood something profound. When you cross over into eternity, the categories of our minds begin to dissolve. The philosophical debates, the denominational barriers, the intellectual pride, all of it seems absurd when confronted with the living Christ. And this is where psychological depth comes in, because the human mind craves certainty, control, and definition. We want to hold the mysteries of God in the palm of our hand, to domesticate them into neat theories. But the truth is, divine mysteries are not meant to be caged by human intellect. They are meant to be entered into, lived in. Death taught me this, because in death, you realize just how powerless human logic is against eternity. There was also a deep emotional revelation standing in his presence. I felt the weight of how much of my life had been entangled with the fear of death. Whether we admit it or not, most of our anxieties, our ambitions, our endless striving are rooted in the fear of mortality. We are afraid of being forgotten, afraid of losing control, afraid of the unknown. And yet when I crossed over, I discovered that death is not unknown if you are in Christ. The sin fact, the most intimate unveiling of what was always true, that He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And in that unveiling, all fear loses its grip. Philosophically, this changes everything. If death is not the end, then life cannot be lived merely for the temporary. If death is not final, then every moment on earth must be seen as preparation, not conclusion. This is why Jesus began to speak to me about tongues in that encounter. He wanted me to see that this gift was not about emotional expression or church ritual. It was about preparing the spirit for eternity. It was about aligning with heaven even while walking on earth. When you strip away all distractions, you realize that this life is a rehearsal for the life to come, and tongues are one of the ways heaven rehearses its language through us even now. But before that revelation, he first had to show me what it means to die. And this is what I want you to understand. Death is not something to fear if you know Christ. Rather, it is the most powerful proof that he is who he says he is. Because on the other side of that silence, when the intellect fails and the body ceases, his presence remains. If his presence remains there, beyond the limits of time, then it means his presence is trustworthy here within the limits of our daily struggles. That awareness changes how you view suffering, how you view faith, how you view even the mysteries you do not understand. And so, when I speak of tongues later, it will be in this context, that it is not just a practice for this life, but a preparation for the eternal life that never ends. But for now, the lesson from my death is this: life is short, fragile, and fleeting, yet it is charged with eternal significance. We cannot afford to waste it on superficial debates or trivial pursuits. If death strips us of everything, then we must learn now to cling only to what lasts forever. Jesus looked at me with eyes that carried both fire and compassion, and in that gaze I felt him saying, "You have spent much energy trying to understand with the mind what can only be grasped by the Spirit." That statement cut me deeply, because it revealed how often I had leaned on my reasoning rather than surrendering to the mystery of faith. And in that moment I realized that tongues, faith, prayer, worship, all of these are not meant to be dissected until they lose power. They are meant to be lived. I came back from that encounter with one conviction that will never leave me. We must live as though eternity is real, because it is. We must pray as though heaven is listening, because it is. And we must embrace the mysteries of God not as problems to solve but as gifts to experience, because they are so. Hear me when I say this: death is not the end, it is the unveiling of the eternal. And if that is true, then the time we are given here on earth is not just survival, not just achievement, but preparation for something infinitely greater. Let us not waste the gift of life chasing shadows. Let us live in light of eternity. Because when the veil is lifted, only what is eternal will remain. When I stood before Jesus beyond the veil of death, what he revealed to me about tongues was so unlike anything I had ever been taught. It was not presented as an optional practice for the hyper-spiritual, nor as some emotional outlet for the desperate, nor even as a badge of superiority for certain believers. What he showed me was that tongues are heaven's language. They are not human speech. They are not manufactured syllables. They are the Spirit of God breathing through the spirit of man, bypassing the frail structures of intellect and culture, and lifting us into communion with the eternal. Think of it for a moment. Every human language is bound by time, culture, and geography. Language are born. Languages are born. Languages die. Entire civilizations have vanished, leaving behind scripts we can no longer even read. Words carry the limitations of human history, but the language of the Spirit, what Jesus revealed to me, is not born of history. It belongs to eternity. It was before Babel, before nations, before separation. It is the speech of heaven itself, a divine stream that cannot be exhausted. And when you pray in tongues, you step out of the fragmented limitations of earthly speech and into a conversation where heaven and earth meet in your own spirit. I had always thought of tongues in terms of personal expression. Some say it's just an overflow of emotion. Others dismiss it as psychological release. But what I was shown is that it is not about human emotion at all. It is about divine intent. It is not the soul trying to vent. It is the Spirit aligning with the Spirit of God. That distinction changes everything, because if tongues are simply an emotional release, then they remain in the realm of psychology as a kind of self-therapy. But if tongues are divine language, then they are not only therapy but transformation. They don't just soothe the human heart, they reshape it. They don't just quiet the mind, they rewire it. They are not therapy from below, they are power from above. Psychologically, this makes sense. Our minds are limited. We live most of our lives trapped in loops of thought, rehearsing worries, anxieties, regrets, and desires. Our intellect, as powerful as it is, also imprisons us in our own perspective. But tongues cut through that prison. When the Spirit prays through us, the cycle is broken. Our words stop coming from memory or logic, and instead flow from eternity. The subconscious is touched, the heart is healed, and the soul is lifted beyond its own wall. Philosophically, it is the collapse of the boundary between finite and infinite. Practically, it is liberation from the narrow corridors of the mind into the wide spaces of God's will. Jesus made it clear to me that tongues are not ornamental, they are essential. Just as the lungs are made to breathe and the heart to beat, the Spirit is made to commune. Tongues are that communion in its purest form, stripped of pretense, stripped of cultural conditioning, stripped of intellectual pride. When you pray in your own language, you often pray with your understanding. That is good but limited. You choose the words, you shape the sentences, you control the narrative. But when you pray in tongues, you surrender control. You let the Spirit form the word. You allow heaven to speak through your mouth what your mind cannot comprehend. And in that surrender, power is released. I understood then why Paul said he spoke in tongues more than all. He knew it was not a performance, but a life. He knew that when his mind grew weary, when his intellect failed to understand the depth of God's mysteries, tongues carried him further, because the Spirit intercedes with groanings too deep for words. And that groaning, that divine utterance, is not just a noise, it is heaven aligning your destiny, heaven unlocking mysteries, heaven fortifying your spirit for battles you cannot even see. From a philosophical lens, tongues remind us that man is not merely rational. If we reduce humanity to reason alone, we strip ourselves of the capacity for transcendence. Man is spirit, soul and body. To neglect tongues is to deny the Spirit its language, to silence the deepest part of who you are. It is like asking a singer to live without song, or an artist to live without color. You can survive, yes, but you will never flourish. The Spirit longs for its own language, and that language is given freely by God through tongues. Now I must also address the fear many have. Some resist tongues because they fear losing control. Others resist because of pride. They want their faith to be intellectual, explainable, manageable. But the kingdom of God is not about control, it is about surrender. If you must understand everything before you accept it, then you will never enter the mysteries of God. For faith itself is stepping beyond sight. Tongues demand that same humility, the willingness to be a vessel of sounds you did not invent, words you do not grasp, expressions you cannot explain. It is the death of pride and the birth of intimacy. And this is why Jesus told me, it is necessary, not because God demands a ritual, but because without it we remain trapped in ourselves. Without it we limit God to what our minds can conceive. With it we open the gates to a flow that is not our own but His. That is why those who pray in tongues consistently experience a depth of spiritual life that others often only theorize about. Their prayers reach beyond themselves. Their worship pierces deep. Their faith grows stronger because their spirit has been trained in the language of eternity. This is not just theology, it has profound psychological implications. Neuroscience itself has observed that praying in tongues activates parts of the brain not engaged by ordinary speech. In other words, it literally rewires the way the brain functions, loosening the grip of stress and opening the mind to new patterns of thought. Isn't that remarkable? Even science accidentally stumbles upon what Jesus revealed, that tongues transform not only the spirit but also the mind and body. So when you hear me speak of tongues as heaven's language, understand this: it is not optional, it is not a curious practice for a few, it is a gift for every believer, because it is the Spirit's way of lifting you above the noise of this world, into the music of eternity. And once you have touched that music, nothing on earth will ever satisfy you again. My friends, if death taught me that eternity is real, then tongues taught me that eternity can touch us here, and heaven's language is not waiting for you on the other side of the grave. It is offered to you in this very moment, in your earthly body, through your surrendered spirit. And once you receive it, your prayers will no longer be bound by fear, your worship will no longer be confined by intellect, and your walk with God will no longer be chained to the limits of human understanding. When Jesus spoke to me about tongues, he did not stop at explaining what it is, he revealed what it does. And this is where the heart of transformation lies, because if tongues were merely a language, even a heavenly one, then it would remain a beautiful mystery, interesting but optional. But what he showed me is that tongues carry power, transformative, life-altering, destiny-shaping power. It is not only communication with God, it is participation in His creative energy, His renewing force, His ongoing work within us. When I returned from death, I could no longer think of tongues as something confined to church services or emotional gatherings. I understood it as something far greater, something deeply practical. Jesus showed me that when you pray in tongues, you are not just speaking. You are building, you are constructing inner strength, you are laying brick upon brick of spiritual fortification in the unseen architecture of your soul. This is why Paul wrote, "He who speaks in tongues edifies himself." That word edify means to build up, to establish, to win. In tongues, your spirit is being enlarged, your inner man is being strengthened, your mind is being renewed. It is not a pastime, it is a process. Think of it psychologically. Much of human weakness comes from inner fragment. People are often torn between what they think, what they feel, and what they know they should do. The mind pulls in one direction, the emotions in another, and the will struggles to keep up. This is why we live within a conflict, anxiety, even despair. But tongues unify. They bypass the divided soul and allow the spirit to flow unhindered with God. And when the spirit leads, the soul begins to follow. The mind finds peace, the emotions find stability, the will finds strength. It is inner alignment, harmony within the self. But more than that, it is alignment with heaven. Philosophically, this touches on one of the deepest human longings, the desire for wholeness. Every religion, every philosophy, every psychology seeks to resolve the fractured nature of man. But what Jesus showed me is that tongues are God's solution, His direct infusion of wholeness into the human spirit. It is not man reaching upward with effort, it is God pouring downward with grace, and in that flow the fragmented human self becomes. That is transformation at the most fundamental level. But the transformation does not stop inward. Tongues release clarity of purpose. Many people live uncertain of their calling, hesitant about their path, confused about decision. When you pray in your own words, you are limited to your understanding. You can only pray about what you know. But when you pray in tongues, you pray beyond what you know. You pray into mysteries. You touch decisions you don't even realize are before you. You cover ground in prayer that your intellect cannot map. And then something beautiful happens. Your life begins to align. Doors open, opportunities appear, strength rises, not because you calculated them, but because the Spirit prepared them. This is why Jesus showed me, tongues are not ornamental, they are strategic. They shape your future without you even being aware of the mechanics. They go ahead of you, laying the foundation of what you will walk into tomorrow. And isn't this consistent with God's nature? He is always ahead of us, always preparing the way. Tongues simply allow us to cooperate with His preparation in a language that reaches beyond our awareness. Spiritually, tongues also arm you for battle. Many of the struggles you face are not natural, but they are battles in unseen realms, against discouragement, against temptation, against invisible forces that press against your faith. You cannot fight such battles with reason alone. Logic is a blunt weapon in a spiritual war. You need spiritual power, and tongues are precisely that. They are the Spirit Himself, praying through you, warring for you, strengthening you. Every syllable in tongues is a strike against the enemy. Every utterance, a shield around your heart. Every groaning, a fortress for your soul. I understood then why so many believers walk defeated, not because they lack faith, but because they neglect the weapon God has given them. Imagine being handed a sword of fire and then leaving it unused, because you could not explain its design. That is what happens when believers dismiss tongues. They surrender their strength in exchange for understanding, but strength does not always wait for understanding. Power comes first, explanation second. Tongues demand trust before comprehension, surrender before analysis. On a psychological level, tongues also break cycles of despair. I have spoken to countless people who feel trapped in depression, trapped in addiction, trapped in fear, and often they cannot even find the words to pray. They feel too weak, too broken, too ashamed. But tongues give voice to the voiceless. Even when the mind cannot form sentences, the spirit within cries out with sounds deeper than words, and in those sounds, healing begins. The very act of yielding to tongues is an act of hope, a refusal to let despair have the last word. It is the Spirit declaring, I will not be silent, and when the Spirit refuses silence, transformation begins. Now do not misunderstand me. Tongues are not a magic formula. They are not incantations that force God's hand. They are participation in His Spirit, and participation always transforms. When you pray in tongues, you enter a stream greater than yourself, and the more you remain in that stream, the more you change, subtly, steadily. The impatience you once battled begins to fade. The anger you once carried begins to weaken. The doubts that plagued you lose their sting. You discover that strength is rising, not from your own effort, but from a source that cannot be exhausted. Philosophically, this strikes at the core of human limitation. We often think change must come from willpower, from self-discipline, from human effort. But human effort alone always runs dry. True transformation requires power beyond the human. Tongues are that power. They connect the finite with the infinite, the weak with the strong, the temporary with the eternal. And in that connection, transformation happens, not by might, not by power, but by His Spirit. So when I returned from death with this revelation, I knew I could not remain silent, because too many of us live far below the power God has given us. We wrestle with weakness, confusion, despair, when all along the Spirit is ready to speak through us, to strengthen us, to arm us. If we would only yield, if we would only open our mouths and allow heaven's language to flow, we would find ourselves transformed in ways we could never imagine. And let me leave you with this final thought. Life is short, battles are real, and eternity is near. You cannot afford to walk in your own strength. You need power greater than yourself, wisdom beyond your mind, and strength deeper than your will. Tongues are that gift. They are heaven's answer to earth's weakness, and if Jesus Himself says they are necessary, then we dare not treat them as options.